Hello, and welcome to the video version of the Left of Greg podcast. I'm Brian Marin, the host and creator of the show. As always, I will be joined by human behavior expert Mr. Greg Williams, who the show is affectionately named after. On the show, we discuss different topics through the lenses of what we call human behavior pattern recognition and analysis. If you'd like to find out more about what that is, please check the links in the episode details and go to our website to learn more. Please don't forget to follow us on social media. The links are also in the episode details, and hit the like and subscribe button to help support our work. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the show.
We are live.
It says we're live. Okay,
We're live.
That means we are live. So for those of you who are just tuning into the audio version, don't forget that you can follow me on Facebook, and when we come up going live on there, you can get in on the conversation. But to jump right into us, today we are joined from across the pond in the UK, Chris Ingledew, and he is a law enforcement officer over in the UK. So first, Chris, thank you so much for jumping on here and joining us today.
No, thank you for having me. It's good to talk.
Yeah. So basically, just for everyone listening, this started out with, I believe, a LinkedIn connection by Greg, which turned into an email and which turned into a discussion back and forth via email, which was one of the most fascinating ones we've had in a while, Greg, where you threw it in there. You know, sometimes we get involved in these, and then when you wrote like 4, 5, 6 paragraphs and I was like all detailed and I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. And then Greg, of course, I knew was already just hunting and pecking on the keyboard, looking stuff up, doing his research. But like it had a lot to do with, in particular, vision, right? And how that affects different standards, different medical tests you have to have for different professions, how you see what you see. And a lot of it relies on color and not just your eye prescription and what you can fix and what you can't. And there's different standards in place. And this is not just with vision, this is with all kinds of different medical standards for different professions, especially when you get into like military, law enforcement, first responder, those types of careers, right? Because you have to have a certain standard that, let's say, if you were just an HR professional in the workplace, don't need to meet that standard because you don't have the requirements for that job, right? So there's kinds of gating mechanisms in it, and a lot of them have been around for a while or there for a specific reason. And some are just there because it's based on something that's always been there and no one's ever changed it or challenged it. And although we're going to be talking about vision today, one to throw out there that I know some people have been affected by it was like here in the US, if you're born, I forget which type diabetic, if you're born with a diabetic, and you can't like serve in the military because you can't, rely on like your insulin shots to always have that, stuff like that. And there was different federal law enforcement agencies that were like that. And it took someone challenging that to change it, to realize, to go, hey, wait a minute, this is kind of an antiquated gating mechanism we have here. This is we're beyond where this rule was placed years ago. And so now we can change that. So I kind of want to just give a little bit of background for the listeners. But before we kind of get into that, Chris, if you don't mind, kind of tell us a little bit about your job over there in the UK, where you're at, and kind of what some of your duties are.
Yeah, I'm a sergeant in Leicester, which is in the East Midlands of England. I work on a neighbourhood team, so effectively it's that classic British Bobby on the beat with the big hat, walking around, shaking hands with people and telling off children. Although I work in the city centre, so it's mainly the homeless and drunks, which replace the old ladies. But yeah, I've been doing that for coming up 3 and a bit years now. I run quite a small team. In the UK, slightly different policing wise to the US. I'm responsible for a number of cops, but also officers that are called police community support officers, which work alongside us, but they don't have the same warranted powers that police officers have. So yeah, I mean, I look after an area of Leicester called the Cultural Quarter, but I'm also responsible for a group of officers who look after sex workers. So my role is very varied, licensed premises, such as public houses, lots of residential blocks of flats or apartments, businesses, and then I look after the classic red light district as well. So my bag is very varied.
And I'm sure you get some good stories on a daily basis.
To be actual and factual and honest here, Brian, that's exactly why I reached out to Chris in the first place, because I had to clear up a couple of local warrants in the red light district for overpayment in one case and underpayment in another. But, Brian, I think it's important, too, to say, listen, Chris, we get letters and we get emails and letters. Look how old I am. and we get Instagrams and everything from people. I don't even know what that is.
No, you
But
don't.
they ask questions about things like we get one batch that are situation awareness related. Then we get one are human behavior, and that's probably the largest net is the human behavior questions. Then we get a couple from that Armed and Dangerous film where the guy goes, "If a guy's lying to me, can I shoot him?" We get a couple of those, because people see that and ask us, or send a picture. They'll send the blurriest, out of focus, horrible picture that's damn near night, and they'll go, "Tell us what you see here." And it's like, okay, don't get it, but everybody listening, Chris's written work was so detailed, and you asked such specific questions. We love that. So if you're listening and you're wondering if we answer questions, Chris, did we answer your question when you wrote in? And did you expect to get a response? I think that's important too. Probably not, I would guess, right?
No, definitely not. No, I've had a lot of one-way emails that never tend to come back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We
I always
pride
tell
ourselves
people,
on that.
I always tell people, be careful when you say, "Oh, I'll email Greg." I said, "Be careful what you wish for."
I love that.
I'm
sitting there and Marin's talking true. I got the new lamp and the gigantic chair, and it's 3 a.m, and I'm just hunting and pecking, typing away because I get excited. That shows that people are truly thinking, because there's two parts of what we're really good at, I think, Chris. And the first part is human performance that leads into human behavior, and the second part being the human behavior that drives everybody, right? That drives all things. And your question was precariously perched right on that line, because it had to do with maintaining your job and your livelihood and everything else in a number of jobs that are restricted to certain people. And then the other half of that is, hey, listen, is this a legitimate concern, right? And Brian, I thought that was the most interesting. Is this legitimate?
Yeah. So let's jump right into a little bit. And one of the questions you brought up had to do with vision and vision tests, and kind of their accuracy, what they're meant for, what they're meant to gauge, and the purpose behind them. So a lot of these stuff. So I'll speak to my experience, military, same thing. You had to go through different, your initial medical screening before you ever even went shipped off to boot camp or anything like that, right? You go through all kinds of weird medical tests. They poke and prod you, and then make you read certain things, and then look at try and pick out numbers in these different colors. And I always say, like, I got to do all kinds of different stuff because it was right after 9/11 in our country, and they really needed people. So the standards start to kind of fall in that, because I remember going through and taking some of them, and I gave an answer, and then the doctor was like, "Hey, why don't you try that again?" And so I was like, "Oh, okay, that's the wrong one." So not to, hopefully no one gets in trouble over that. I'm sure not, but I was allowed through when I probably shouldn't have been allowed through in certain areas, but we made up for that, hopefully. So one of these is different vision tests, where they test, like, differences in red and green colors, your day and night vision, what they call color blindness, which is actually kind of a detailed definition and often kind of misunderstood. And then just like your prescription, what you can and can't read, and are you nearsighted, farsighted? That can be fixed through different methods. Usually, like wearing glasses, you're allowed to be off this much if you are corrected vision to this level. So Greg, I'll just kind of throw to you first. Why is that important, and specifically what we're talking about in police work?
Yeah, I like going to the science. And first of all, going back to Marin being chosen by the Marine Corps haphazardly, is what we like to say. You did score high on the blood alcohol content.
I did. I nailed that portion.
I must tell you that you were probably in the top 5%.
He went, "Ooh, Marine."
Exactly. That's why the Army wouldn't take you. But no, so let's talk. I mean, God, Buddha, Vishnu, Allah set us up for a bunch of survival circumstances, wanting us to thrive in our environment. So we had things like rods and cones, rods that picked up light even in low light and no light conditions and helped us make out our surrounding. And there's our cones, which is our color vision. The confluence of those two helps us see things, whether we're in a cave or venturing out to go fishing or gathering or hunting or whatever. That's fantastic. And then historically, color perception is a critical part of comprehending that world now that we're outside of the cave from that survival standpoint. Things like my skin is turning red. That might be a sunburn. I have to do something about it. This meat is turning black. It might be tainted, so I might not want to eat it. There's blood trailing away from the thing that I stuck I want to track it. Wait a minute, that's not blood. It's merely this fluid or whatever, right? So there's a whole bunch of scenarios where you can see that we were designed to have one more tool, not the only tool, to help us survive. And I think that's where the rub is, Brian. I think the scientific rub when we start talking about color deficiency is the fact that there's so many other sensors that my body has that can help me perform a job. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and that's kind of where it comes from. So when it gets into stuff like understanding these color tests, Greg, like the red and green, and Chris, you can jump in here too. Why is that test important, or why do I have to go through that? Why did you guys have to do that? Why did I have to do that? What's the point there?
So I'll pass it to Chris, but the very first part of that is, Brian, that there's certain things that maybe we should be excluded from. For example, back then we were talking about survival. Well, today's survival could be something like LEDs, a light emitting diode, and they routinely use red and green. Now there's a Dodge that says I need to know where the traffic light is. Listen, if you've walked around your neighborhood for 5 minutes, you'll figure out the code there. You'll crack that code. But I do agree that things like LEDs and other things might give you a disadvantage over somebody else vying for that position. Now, Chris, would that be fair? What's the role you think in across the pond of having that color vision test for your position?
Well, there isn't a colour vision test for standard policing anymore. It was removed in, I want to say, 2003, following a bit of work done by a think tank over here. And they realised that, evidentially speaking, colour's not that important, or it's not going to be fatal to a successful prosecution at court, sorry. So that was removed. The only time you can have any colour vision issue, or you can't have a colour vision issue in the police, is if you're monochrome, which means basically seeing black and white. And those people are very few and far between. I think it's something like 1 in 400,000, if that. So there's not many of those people about. So the evidential side is, null and void now. That's gone. Where it's still pertinent in the UK is when you're going to armed policing, because obviously the police in the UK aren't routinely armed. We walk around with a stick, can of hairspray, and bad intentions pretty much. Oh, and handcuffs as well. We'll need them occasionally. But we do have a very small sort of armed wing, which respond to very similar jobs to what we go to, but obviously when the danger is just that little bit more, that the unarmed colleagues can't go to it.
Can you give, Chris, real quick, can you give a little breakdown of kind of how that works? I know you're structured with, everyone's at one level, then you have certain you have they call them like AFOs, and then the ARVs and the MAST, like there's different units, not unlike we have here in the US, but your initial unit, obviously, they aren't armed. All officers are unarmed, and then you have to get special training, correct? Even just to have an armed presence, or how does that work?
Yeah, when you join the police in the UK, you have to undergo a 2-year probationary period. So everyone who comes in as a regular officer has to do that 2 years. Then once you've done your 2 years, that's when you can branch out into the other areas. So if you want to go into investigation and be a detective, you can go that way. Or if you want to do what I do, go into neighbourhood policing, you go there. Everyone starts off pretty much on answering the emergency calls, the 999s, and then that's where you learn your trade, as it were, and then you move on to your specialisms from there. And armed policing is one of those specialisms. So it's a sideways move. It's not an upwards move. It's a sideways move. But the AFO route, the authorised firearms officer route, is quite a tough route to go down. The selection process is really difficult. And then once you've gone through the selection process, if you're offered a place on a course, the course is 11 weeks. And that's to do with weapons handling, tactics, searching, loads of other stuff, and it is really tough to get through. The attrition rate, I think, of the course is at least 50%, so there is quite a big dropout just on that.
Okay, yeah. So I know that's a big difference. And then as you get further in, you can basically continue that, right? So now you're whatever that basic level armed officer is, then you can go into like the counterterrorism units and kind of continue training, correct?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Yeah, you can specialize. Once you specialize, you can specialize further. So there's effectively, you can go, it's like you said, into the counter-terrorism world. So where you can learn to repel out helicopters, storm planes that are on runways and take out. It's that quasi-military role, which is it sort of branches into what our special forces would undertake. But obviously, they're not as close as what the police are. So that they sort of bridge that gap between the military and the police when it's required.
Okay. Yeah. So, and then obviously each one of those levels you get to, there's obviously more and more stringent requirements, I'm sure, with experience, time, and then probably qualifying standards. I'm assuming that just as you climb that kind of branch in those units, it gets more and more selective, right?
Yeah, it definitely does. And the fitness tests go up.
Yeah.
And then once you get through, you have to qualify to certain standards, and obviously using different weapon systems and what have you and tactics, you have to be able to demonstrate an aptitude for those roles. And if you don't meet the standard, gone.
Okay. So one of the issues that kind of happened with you as you were making your way through that kind of area was not really your performance, we'll say, in terms of your physical performance, and I'm sure your shooting ability and all that cool stuff, but it was something that you basically have no control over, right? It had to do with your vision. So kind of explain what happened there.
Yeah, no, I filled out my application form, which was the first stage. I was successful on that, and I was invited to the medical. I passed the hearing test. I'd already done the fitness test, so passed that. And then I did the eye test and fell flat on my face with the colour vision. I knew I was colour blind before I started, but I had a feeling that I would get through because I'd done part of the test previously, so I could do my police driving, and I got through because I was told it was the same standard. However, when I went back for the firearms medical, I was put through some more stringent tests and failed them all miserably, and then was ejected from the process. And I couldn't really understand why. So I asked a few questions of the medical team at my previous force where I used to work, and was told go and speak to Firearms. So I spoke to Firearms, asked them, and they said go and speak to the medical people. So I ended up speaking to there's an organisation called the College of Policing in the UK, and they basically set the standards for everything over here. So you know, entry requirements, physical standards, what have you. They're the people who sort of own all of that. So I asked them, and then they came back with 4 reasons as to why someone who's colourblind can't be on firearms. 3 of them I knew was sort of rubbish anyway, so I managed to sort of sidestep those. But the main one that they brought up, which on the face of it does seem quite reasonable, is that if you're colourblind and you're required to take a shot, it's called a critical shot in the UK, which is effectively if a senior officer says to you, you know, a critical shot's been authorised and it's the guy in the red jacket. If you're colourblind and you confuse red with brown or red with green, you might make a mistake or fail to act at all, and then somebody dies and it's not the right person. It could be, you know, large number of the public, or it could be yourself or your colleagues, because you either failed to shoot because you hesitated or because you shot the wrong person. So on the face of it, that sounds like a very reasonable argument. However, I've got a few issues with it, and I emailed Greg about them, and that's
yeah,
where we are
right
now.
there. And I would happy to say, you know, maybe to the average person who knows nothing about law enforcement or training or firearms or the eye and the brain, that would seem like reasonable, right? Well, yeah, you can't. Yeah, you don't want to shoot the wrong person. But when you're telling me this mythical scenario that they've come up with, I'm sitting there just like, this is crap. This is total rubbish. This is BS, man. Like, this is like, that's a ridiculous scenario someone made up. But I could see that coming from someone outside who doesn't know any better. Absolutely, I could see them coming up with that and being completely logical, and I understand that. But once you get into how this actually works, well, one, are you just going to go off of, hey, shoot the guy in the red jacket? Like, that seems just such a random description of a human being, for one, off the top of the bat. But that's kind of where you started. So I know you had some issues with that. That's where your email kind of thread started to Greg. So we can start here wherever you guys want. Greg, I'll pass to you and kind of start off. Why is that ridiculous? Why does that not make sense? And why should we, let's pick that apart a little bit, right?
Well, just let's not let facts ruin a perfectly good story. You get what I'm trying to say? If we start there. So first of all, for all our viewers and listeners, thank you. And being color vision deficient, it's the inability to distinguish colors, not the inability to see colors. So that's an important standard. And then whether you're talking about protanopic or deuteranopic color blindness, that means that you're losing sensitive cones, either red or green sensitive, and you might not be able to distinguish the color red. And this strikes 1 in 12, 1 in 14 people. Red being the number, or the color rather, that most people that have a deficiency, theirs is a red deficiency. So that's where all of these stories derive from. So, Brian, I like to go back to the science of the origin story. So when they start fighting and saying Chris can't go to that training, what they're going to say is, hey, listen, you can't tell that your hamburger is cooked well enough because you can't tell the red difference. Okay, well, there's a thing called a meat thermometer, and I'm quite sure that it works a little bit better than the average eye because people undercook meat all the time. Then they'll say, well, listen, the guy in the red shirt, if that's the sole descriptor you're going to use to escalate to a lethal force scenario, I think your standard needs to be revised, you know. And the other thing is, unless you're in kinetic combat, I can't imagine somebody telling you to, hey, you're cleared hot to shoot another person, you know, and then they'll give you the time and distance gap. Look, unless you're like working at a casino and your job is to exchange chips, where I can see immediately that if you had the wrong chip and it didn't have a number on it, you might have a problem. But then I look at ramps going into a business and handles on showers and toilets, and I say, okay, if a person has a deficiency, what they do is they increase things around that person to make it easier for them. And Chris, I'd like you to specifically talk about one thing that is in all the stuff that I read, research material, which was about a taser, Thomas A. Swift's electric rifle, and where they said, well, you won't be able to see the color spectrum, so how will you use the targeting method? Can you talk about that? And again, anything additional to that?
Yeah, no, that was part of the initial argument from the College of Policing. They said that people who are red green colour, or yeah, specifically red green colourblind, won't be able to see the red dot of the laser on the taser, and also the sighting systems that the AFOs use, they're holographic, so you won't be able to see the crosshair because it's red. The taser thing, we've actually sorted that out now. People with colour blindness in the UK, or police officers, not people, can carry taser. That's something that's been amended and changed. But they said that the red would blend into other reds or to other greens or what have you, other colours. And it's clearly just factually incorrect. And the one thing that they didn't do, and this is the thing that sort of, without being too blunt about it, really grips my shit, is that they never put a taser in the hand of somebody who's colourblind and done that, you know, very basic, rigorous testing. Can you see that? That question was never asked. It was all hypothetical stuff. And what they got a colour vision expert to go away and say, yeah, people who fail colour vision tests will struggle to see red in certain circumstances, ergo, they can't see the red dot of a taser or the laser sight on the taser. So yeah, it was just those sort of things. It's that the work in laboratories bears no resemblance to the reality of the real world, and never the twain shall meet apparently in policing. However, in other areas they tend to, and common sense sort of reigns supreme, but for some reason it doesn't seem to with regards to colour vision and policing in England and Wales.
Well, you kind of nailed it right there when you said,
right,
you know, the laboratory doesn't necessarily replicate real conditions, and that's huge, because rightly so, this is where a lot of this stuff started, right? You got to go, okay, well, there's certain vision requirements. What do the scientists say about it? What is the lab performance? What's the baseline for that? And if that works, it works. And if you never get a discrepancy or no one ever challenges it, then it just becomes, hey, well, this is why we do it. I mean, you're getting into such an area. Like I have in my background right now, I mean, you can see I have a flag, I have our Arcadia logo, and I have a little pennant from USC. They all have red on them. They're all 3 different shades of red. If you ask me what color any of them were, I'd say red. Like it you know, yeah. You're almost splitting hairs here on us, what has seemed to become kind of an arbitrary you know, an arbitrary gating mechanism to get in. Like it's just there because it's always been there. So like go ahead, Greg. I know.
Yeah, no, you're right on something. And remember, when we're talking, Brian is a subject matter expert in long range precision gunfire. He's got a bunch of different histories in a bunch of different areas, and he split a bunch of wigs in combat. And so we have to make sure that when we're talking about this very situation, if I was going to talk arbitrary and capricious, which this standard seems to be, and folks, do your homework, look them up. It's a legal standard. My thing is, can you help me, Chris, understand how many times your armed snipers were directed by their supervisors to shoot the guy in the red jacket this last year? How many times did that?
If I was to round it up, it'd be less than 0.
Okay, so if we multiply by 0 for each answer, protracting that out, you'll understand the absurdity of what I'm talking about. So, Brian, I want to make sure that the viewers and listeners understand why we're fighting for Chris and against this color deficiency hoax or myth. It's because if it was founded in science and you could show me research. Can I go back to one thing? When we were doing a bunch of work with IEDs, I had to deal with a bunch of scientists, and the one rigor that they put into the testing process was part of the control group had to put their hand in warm water, part in cold water, and the third group in no water. And they said that would equate the stressful conditions of combat when we were about to go into kinetic Iraq. And it was like, okay, I don't know what world you're all from, but we've got people that are being exploded and shot and killed and are committing suicide. And we have all these external stressors and this external stimuli that we can point to and look at. Things like that we brought up episodic cortisol. Brian, you'll know that how many times that we did those tests. Well, I'll believe that scientific study, and I'll even follow your theory if your hypothesis is sound and it's based on research that I can get from another a source or a situation that's occurred that's very popular that everybody can look and say, hey, the die has been cast with this. But everything I researched and everything I looked up, and the same with Brian, we couldn't find a case. There was no case. So what I mean by arbitrary and capricious is let's not put something in there and say this is a new gating mechanism that we just came up with because theoretically this situation could arise. Well, that doesn't pass the smell test for me.
I'll say no. It's a really tough one because it's not a tough one at all. It's really easy. The standards for testing in the UK for armed policing, they were made slightly more, made a lot more difficult about 2 or 3 years ago, which was partially my fault. So if anyone does come across this and they could get into firearms or kicked off firearms, it's probably because of me. So sorry about that. But there are AFOs around the UK who are colourblind because they got through on the testing, because the testing that's used is no good. The Ishihara test, which me and Brian were speaking about earlier, that only detects red-green colour vision problems. It doesn't detect blue-yellow. So if you've got a blue-yellow problem, then you'll get past that test and then you'll not be required to do the other tests. However, people with blue-yellow colour vision issues have worse night vision, apparently. So that in itself creates more problems.
Right.
So yeah, and the other tests that they use, what they designed to do is obviously identify and categorize your issue. However, what they tend to do is the people with the least severe problems, which is out, so people that should be suitable according to the standard that's in place, get weeded out. However, if you've got a really severe colour deficiency, it won't pick it up, so you'll get through. So the people that shouldn't be getting through do get through. The people that should be getting through don't.
Right.
And these are tests. The Ishihara test has been going for like 80 years. It's not changed in 80 years. So it's why we're using something that's 80 years old.
Oh,
we don't use 8-year-old firearms.
How did you do on the Ishihara test, Brian?
Yeah, I was going to say, I hopped on that. Everyone listen, I'll have that link up in the episode details. You can hop on there and take it. But I scored a 50% on that right before we got on this podcast and took it, which I knew I had the same thing, that red green. I was like, yep, I remember this. And, military use it for a number of reasons too. But I think the point of me talking about my experience with it, and I had another guy, Josh, following along right now live, who said, yeah, I had the same thing happen to me when I went in the military, and I had one good eye and one bad eye. Like basically he said, like one eye I see an HDMI and the other one is like, the old AV cable. And then same thing, I'm completely colorblind. But I think they also know, like, hey, this is kind of a ridiculous test. It doesn't actually affect things on the ground, because otherwise, I mean, our nods, our NVGs, well, they used to be, they're a little bit different now. We're all green. And then, you had same, like you just said, like you had red optics and or green night sights on different sidearm stuff. So it's like, well, I've never known anyone who put it up and just said, oh, I can't see the sight. Like, you know what I mean? Saying, like, I don't get, like, I've never come across that before, ever. And so the interesting part is that it's still in place. And like you just said, these are the tests they use. But so what tell me kind of like what happened, because you obviously then you started researching it. You went back and said, all right, are there any cases where this comes up? What's the standard here? What's the precedent, and why we're using this? What's going on? So you kind of started, obviously did your own research. You compiled all this information. You looked into it. What did you start to find as you kind of like put all that together and then tried to go back and present your case? Kind of what happened there with everything?
I literally did the hard yards. I rang the 43 police forces in England and Wales and asked to speak to all their firearms teams, and I found a good number of AFOs up and down the country who were colourblind. So they're all really helpful and wanted to talk to you and say, oh yeah, it's a load of rubbish, don't worry about it, you know, this sort of thing makes no sense. However, if you actually get them to stick their head above the parapet, and for very obvious reasons, they don't want to, because they don't want to lose their jobs. When I say lose their jobs, they lose their position on the firearms team and go back to being a regular cop, not be sacked, because that wouldn't happen. So it was very much sort of anecdotal evidence that I had. It was, well, me on my own. Basically what happened was I ended up at an employment tribunal because I tried to argue that the standard wasn't necessary and not required. And I said, if you can pass the initial firearms course, which is that 11-week course we spoke about earlier, that course will weed you out if you're not good enough. And if your eyes aren't good enough for that course, then you'll get caught out. And ultimately, I was unsuccessful with that. But a really good sample of evidence that I tried to bring in and that was sort of kicked into the long grass quite early on at court was Western Australia Police. They routinely arm, just like they do in the States, but they've removed all colour vision testing, I want to say in 2003 again. And they've reported absolutely no issues at all. I mean, I've done some digging, I've spoken to them on the phone and email, and nobody has got any issues at all. No one's been shot incorrectly in Australia based on the colour vision deficiency of a police officer over there.
I would see two things that we have to address, Brian, based on Chris's testimony today. And he's been forthright, forthcoming, transparent, and it's a great issue. But there's going to be people out in the audience that are going to go, hey, this is sour grapes. He couldn't get into this special position, so he's pissed. He wants to create this new area where he can go into. The second thing is, the second side of that coin, perhaps, is that I want you to think for a minute, just fiscally, just financially, just fiduciarily, of what that means of taking a trained person that passed all of the tests, but now the standard comes back and says, well, if there's a color deficiency and you can't pass this test, you're out. Listen, we're talking in the U.S. right now about restructuring police departments and defunding or creating a difference in the training. You're talking about having these wonderful, experienced veteran officers like you that don't qualify for a position, and they might lose you. And folks, we're not talking that Chris can't drive and he's mowed down citizens. We're not talking about that he poured milk in a bowl and thought it was spaghetti sauce, and his old lady punched him in the head. We're not talking about these mythical unicorns and tilting at windmills. We're talking about something that hasn't moved the dial. It hasn't shown that it was dangerous or deadly. Doesn't affect NVGs, doesn't affect nods or thermals. You can do your job, right? I mean, there's no other aspect of your job that you failed in except this. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, no, it's spot on.
Okay, so what do you say? And I apologize, Brian. What do you say when somebody might come up with the point that, hey, sour grapes, spilled milk, you're just pissed that you can't, go into one of those specialty jobs?
It's not gonna.
No, that's for you, Chris.
Yeah.
Marin's dealt with rejection all his life.
I have.
All right. For you, Chris, what if somebody came up and said that?
I would understand it, because it does sound like sour grapes. I'm not going to deny it, and I'll be honest with you, there is a little bit of sour grapes, but it's not the fact that they've said no to me. It's the fact that they said no to me, but not actually giving me a real reason and not allowed. First of all, for me to demonstrate suitability. And second of all, to back it up with evidence. All they've brought up to me is anecdotal, laboratory-based evidence. I mean, I don't know if you know, but colour vision standards, as far as I'm aware, came in following a train crash in Sweden. I think it was in the early 1800s. and a train went through a set of lights, crashed and crashed into a village, I think it was, killed a good number of people, and obviously the driver died. And from that, they decided that the reason why the train driver didn't stop at the lights was because he was colorblind. Now, no autopsy was done on the train driver because there's not enough of him left to do it.
Right.
They just made an assumption. And a chap called Holmgren, who was a visual specialist at the time, all of a sudden created some color vision tests. Now, this is my X-Files conspiracy theory, but he might have made a little bit of money out of developing color vision tests and selling them to the rail industry.
Just a bit.
So there's a lot of people, and again, this sounds like side grapes, I know it does, but there's a lot of people who have an interest in color vision testing, because if you don't have color vision standards for certain areas, then you don't need the tests. And if you don't need the tests, you've got nothing to sell. But again, that's just me being
that's a great point for
Yes,
one, going a historical perspective of, hey, this is where it started, and then now look at it today. Fast forward a couple hundred years, this is where it's at now. This is what happens when those policies get into place, and this is where I go on even larger level with different selection process or barriers to entry or standards you have place. Like it should be, what's the operational standard, right? Meaning, like, what are you going to do? Can you accomplish all the shooting and the driving and all the different physical requirements you have to do your job? And then if you don't meet one of these odd medical things, it should be, well, how do we get you there, right? Because you clearly can possess the skills, the knowledge, attitude, aptitudes, abilities to do this job. So it should be, well, how do we feel? I mean, because people come up with all kinds of different ones. I mean, there's different, like in here, the US, there's all kinds of different ones, especially federal law enforcement agencies, like, oh, you got to have a college degree. It's like, okay, well, you're automatically, you're ruling out a bunch of people who are highly qualified, have the experience for that position, but didn't go to school. What if they didn't have access to school? What if they didn't have the money to do that? What if they didn't, I mean, now you've got someone who did, and they're already a step ahead, even though they're younger and don't have the experience. It's like these weird arbitrary ways of doing that. And I think now, because of cases like yours and other things that come up, you have to challenge it. Someone has to challenge it and show good cause. And then for people to go, oh, wait a minute, yeah, let's take a look at this. But like you said, if there's someone in there that has some sort of financial interest in keeping that going, well, now you've got a whole bunch of issues you're up against. And someone's like, hey, man, you're not taking away my paycheck because of my whole life revolves around this.
Well, think of this too, Brian. Chris, one quick note on that. Brian and I have traveled all over the United States and talked and lectured and had seminars. And the hardest nut to crack is schools. Right now during COVID, not a lot of kids are at school, so not a lot of school shootings. But back during the school shootings, which are always happening in the United States at one point or the other, we would go in because a parent called us. We didn't do a cold call. We didn't show up in your area, knock on your school door, but a parent called us that had attended or seen one of our other training programs and said, this is the thing that we need, the human behavior, human performance thing for our school, so we can reduce the risk posed by a school shooter. So we would go in, we'd do the program, and every one of the parents was like, we want to do this. Kids are involved, and the teachers and everything. And then the school board or the superintendent or whatever the supervisory layer would come in and go, yeah, it's great. We love what you guys are doing. We just don't think it's going to happen here. And what that type of linear thinking is what you're getting from your folks. So if you drew a line on a yellow pad and you drew just one very narrow V spike coming up off of that line for the people that can't see me at home, what you're saying is, in the life of that school, the school shooter is that narrow little line that goes up there, and it'll almost never happen. Liken that to your shoot the guy in the red shirt. The problem is that that's where all of the risk lies. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So in real time, when we're talking about a school shooter, or we're talking about, something that has huge volumes of science behind it, that makes sense. But in yours, we're on a unicorn timeline. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Where we falsely made those. So I feel bad about that, Chris. And what was the board's answer? Is it a definitive answer, or can you go back once more information becomes available?
At the minute, it's definitive, and it's a no. And one of the reasons why I think I was unsuccessful when I ended up at the tribunal was just because I had very little. All the evidence that I gathered was coming from me, and I'm not a subject matter expert in armed policing. I'm not a subject matter expert in the visual sciences. And the Friday before my hearing, the Bataclan shooting happened in France, where basically a terrorist walked into I think it was a concert and shot loads of people. And so straight away, people they were worried. They were worried about it. So yeah, it was a tough ask. I've lost my train of thought a little bit now.
So it's that and your color deficiency.
Yeah.
That's why those bastards are trying to fire you.
Not the eyes.
Yeah. Chris, was there maybe another reason that they gave you that?
Have you been drinking?
Yeah.
Where am I? Sorry, what's your name?
Yes. Where am I? So, no.
But it's for
go ahead, Greg.
What you're saying is the definitive answer. The week before it happened, those things tainted it. So you don't think that they're going to look at this problem again, even though I would opine that the sports industry in the U.S. and the UK are looking closely at this issue every day. You know,
I think they are going to look at it, but it boils down to money and it boils down to interest. Yes. And there's not a lot of money about at the minute, and interest is elsewhere. And there's myself and a couple of other guys who work for the Police Federation, which is effectively the police union, who keep banging the door and kicking it out. And there is interest amongst chief officers because they're worried that they're going to lose a lot of AFOs because they're in post at the minute. Some of them have got, in excess of 20 years in post, and to lose those people and all that experience is, they're not going to be able to replace it. And when 95% of your armed staff are male, and you're talking between 8 and 12% of 95% of your talent pool is going to be unavailable for you, you're never going to replace those numbers. And armed policing is massively undersubscribed in this country because of the amount of risk it carries. A lot of people are nervous about doing it. Here, if a police officer shoots somebody, that's 6 months of their life can be on hold. And some guys, there was a chap called Tony Long, who he shot a man called Adele Rodney dead in 2005. It was a legitimate shooting, nothing wrong with it at all. He retired a few years later, and they dragged him out of retirement and tried him for murder for that shooting.
Wow.
And he was found not guilty. But the irony of that is he's colourblind as well. So, and he's had a very sort of eventful career in terms of police shootings in the UK. I think he shot 4 people. 3 of them ended up dying. No issues with any of the shootings at all justified. And he was one of the people who worked in implementing the current tactics that the police use now. And those tactics are derived, like I said before, from military tactics, from the SAS, the 22 SAS. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be in 22 SAS as a counter-terrorism specialist, guess what? You could be colourblind.
Yeah,
it's not a problem.
Well,
and the police are doing the exact same things what they're doing.
That's the thing, is that that's at least with the military and a lot of stuff, is there's always, like, where the joke is like, well, there's always a waiver, right? And that's the point, is that here's the requirements. If you don't meet one of them, you can get a waiver, because what that means is a board or some individual or individuals sat down, looked at the specifics of your case and verified whether or not that had an effect, and went, oh no, you're good, we'll write a waiver for that, that's fine. Normally it wouldn't meet our requirement, but I've now understood it, you've stated your case, it's on here. So that seems more applicable. But a lot of the stuff that we're talking about too, I think there are some generational differences that are finally starting to change. Because you look at different, okay, you got vision requirements, there's age requirements for certain stuff. It's like, well, maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, yeah, but it, that made sense. But a lot of that, not anymore. Dude, you got guys in their 40s right now that can outrun, outshoot, outlift guys in their 20s, and they have 20 years of experience behind them. You know what I'm saying? Like, all of that stuff is changing a little bit. And so now some of those requirements are like, well, maybe we don't have to have this maximum age at like 35 for this. Maybe we can bump that up to 40 now, or 45, because people are living longer, people are working longer, people are healthier, people are, physical training has gotten a lot better at a greater scale. So all of those things start to change a little bit. And I did want to throw in one thing that one of our listeners and our friend, he was on, Andy Brown. He's got a great book called Warnings Unheeded, but he was on, and he said his response was good. I don't know if you checked into this, but he said, I wonder if Taser or any red dot industry, optic or anything, have they done any testing with colorblind users? Because it's in their interest to prove that, it works and used by all. So I don't know if you looked into that. That's actually a great point.
As far as I'm aware, they haven't, but I'm sure you guys probably use this already, but the new Taser that's coming out, the Taser, I'm going to call it Taser 7, has a red dot and a green dot. And apparently the green dot is more salient for everybody. So yeah, that's the advance that's what I'm making. But it's a factory thing, isn't it? It's a tooling thing. If you need to put a blue light on it for 10 people who work in a city in the UK, you could do that. But again, it all comes down to the cost, doesn't it? And who's going to pay for it? But yeah, I mean, as far as I'm aware, Axon, who make Taser, they've not actually specifically looked at color vision, but they are changing what they do. So it could be that they are.
Good to hear from Andy Brown. We love you, Andy. Hey, Brian, one thing I want to bring up that Chris said earlier, to put a fine point on it. The reason that Chris was talking about the males and females in law enforcement work is because males are the lion's share of the people that have color blindness. Very rare in females. So they're in a male-dominated job. You would exclude males from something that they could do normally by using the color vision, and it would set up an unfair advantage perhaps for females versus males. So there's another legal standard that would be absolutely unnecessary if this wasn't so arbitrary. And I would ask, because we have a long reach, we're number 10 in Japan, number 1 in North Macedonia. Love our folks out in Greece. If you guys know of cases, ladies, gentlemen, write in so Brian can send that information along to Chris, and we can have him back on the show and say, Chris, you bastard, you hid the infamous case of the bakery murders. Yeah. And because let's be realistic about this. This is a tremendous amount of anxiety with you, a veteran decorated copper on the streets that loves your job. You're not pissed at your job. You're not trying to get extra money. As a matter of fact, most people don't want the position that you're trying out for because of the associated stress with it. And I would say, Brian, as a professional shooter, I mean, there are no such standards for U.S. Marine Corps snipers. Brink said there's none for the U.S. Army snipers.
No, the military stuff can get away with that. I think because it's military, some requirements are actually less for certain things because you're not, it's like here in the U.S. you're not going to be, you're not going up against U.S. citizens who have constitutional rights if you're in the U.S. military, right? So it's a little bit different. But I'm curious, Chris, like, so you went through everything, you tried to did as much research as you could, and you didn't really find any, you couldn't find any cases where this was a factor or some determining factor where it really made a decision or what happened. But what would the evidence be to like keep that standard, to say, no, this is what you have to pass? What's their argument, so to speak, as to why that's there? Or do they have one, or is it just there because it's always been there?
It's there because it's always been there. That no evidence that I'm aware of. It's all up that hypothetical risk. It's that 1 in a million chance that you could get it wrong. And to the layperson, you think, yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. And when I had my tribunal, I was asked a question, and it was something along the lines of, okay, you're an armed police officer, you're looking up at a balcony, and on that balcony there's 3 men. One's wearing a red jacket, and the 2 others are wearing brown, and you can't tell the difference between any of them. Would you pick the right person? And what I wanted to say was, well, can we talk about that example properly, or do you just want a 1-word answer? And it was just a 1-word answer, so I said yes. But that scenario, I mean, again, to everyone who's listening, that sounds reasonable. And to me, I mean, I've done a lot of soul searching with this, thinking, can I actually do this job? Am I, capable of doing it? And I still think yes, but that scenario is just it's so narrow that it's completely unrealistic. It talks nothing about, well, first of all, what mood was I in when I woke up this morning? Yeah. Did I fall out with my wife before I came to work? How have I been at work? What's the nature of the job? Where's the information come from? What sort of briefing have I had? When I'm traveling to this incident, what's the information that's being told to me? Where's the information come from that this guy in the red jacket it poses a danger to the public that's so great that he needs to be killed instantly? okay, who's passed that information? Does that come from a member of the public? Because if it has, we're probably not going to trust it anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
If it's come from another police officer, he's probably there, so he can say it's him.
Well, the guy with the gun.
It's like so much information. And the issue, one of the issues I have with the colour vision standard is it's treating people with colour vision deficiency as a faulty machine. That if you put this information in, because the machine's faulty, you get the end product that comes out is going to be wrong. But it doesn't work like that. People are just massively complex machines, and it's hard. Sorry, it's hard for me to describe how I do something because I've been doing it for over 40 years, and I've always got by. I've never had in my policing career or in life in general. The only time I've ever had a problem was basically, don't ask me to pick out a tie for you because it won't match your shirt. It'll be pointless. But in normal life, it's never been a problem.
Which amazingly comes up more often than shoot the guy in the red jacket.
Yeah,
just so you know.
Absolutely.
Well, no, and you know, this again, I go back to this hypothetical example as a perfect example. They asked you a horrible question. Okay, like if right now, if you're watching a football game, whether that's American football, you know, European football, whichever one, even if everyone was still wearing, you know, you got two teams all wearing the same uniform, even if they all had the same number jersey with no names on it, would you be able to tell the difference between different members of that team? Well, absolutely you can. There's physical description. And to go back to that, especially for police work here, like, I mean, you're going to want to go off of the color of the clothes they're wearing. Dude, you know how many times someone robs a place, runs around back, takes that hoodie off, drops those pants, and comes walking out because they're dressed. I mean, it's just like, this is such a completely arbitrary way to look at it. And and it seems just like no one's putting any thought into actually taking the time to research it, use a practical example, try to set up, I mean, just ask someone, try to set up an experiment to fool you, Chris. Put a realistic standards out to where, all right, would you be able to make the right decision in this situation? And it's going to be yes, of course you are. Like to come down to this, like, you know, odd, what shade of color the jacket, like no one even notices that stuff anyway. Even when you call it in, even the first responding officers, you're probably going to get some of that description wrong anyway too. I mean, there's always that error in there. So I mean, I don't, it just seems like an odd way to go about it.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I'll go back to a job that I went to on my last set working. So what day are we on today? Wednesday. I think this probably happened on Monday. One of my colleagues was assaulted in the city centre, and he presses his panic button, shouts it up, and the description is grey top, black trousers, white trainers, 6 foot. It was black top, grey trousers, black trainers, and he was about 5'4". So I mean, and that's from a police officer. And so it, you know, I mean, colour itself is completely unreliable. There's a piece of work that I managed to get a look at by a professor called, I think it's called Michael Webster, and the work that he did, he showed that there's a 30%, I think it was, variance between colour naming in the colour normal. So one guy who's passes all the colour vision tests could say it's yellow, and another guy who passes all the colour vision tests could say it's red. And that's quite a big difference between yellow and red, and that's in the colour normal. So why are we relying on colour when it is so inherently unreliable? There's loads of things that can impact it. If you stand under a street light or a sodium light, you know, that changes the colour completely. If you come from a different part of the world to me, and UK is a massively multicultural society, if somebody comes from another part of the world and they say, oh, that guy was wearing purple, but their version of purple is actually my version of green, you know, and that causes a problem straight away. So yeah, it just the fact that the reliance is so heavy on colour, and I know for a fact we don't rely on colour. The standard says that we do, but speaking to operational cops, I'm talking police constables who are AFOs up to you know, chief constables, you know, the people who run the organisation. They say no, it would never happen. It would never happen because it's too dangerous. And you work on information. You don't work on, you know, the colour of a piece of clothing. It just makes no sense at all. But because that standard's there, and people feel the need to defend it, and you don't, you know, defend it, but go and find out if it's right or not, and then, you know, challenge it. And, you know, with firearms being so undersubscribed as well, you know, if there's a chance that you could get, you know, 10% more applicants into that role, then surely that investment there is worth it.
Yes.
I'm nobody, I'm nothing, but I've been teaching enhanced optics and observation as part of our courses for, it'll be 38 years, August 15th. And Brian has been with me for a long time, and he's seen me teach, and he's taught with me, and we've taught about the eye and the brain and the linkages. And the fact of the matter is, in all the stuff that I've written, it's always the three things that make things visible to humans is light, motion, and edges. We talk about rods and cones. We talk extensively about aberrations in your vision and how your brain makes up things whether they're there or not. But I can't think for the life of me in that entire almost 4 decades of work and research, Brian, where we've ever brought up color as a distinguishing factor, with the exception of when we were talking cultural significance, where a color may be culturally significant in an environment. And then guess what? The differences are so minute. So I would go back to that standard too. I would say the legal standard is light, motion, and edges. That's what drives your central or your peripheral vision. And there are so many other factors that are more important than color, and specifically this brand of color deficiency.
Yeah, I agree with that. We've got even people following along. Sarah's following along, saying like, "Hey, she's in graphic design," and so she's like, "Look, when someone says a color and it's completely something else, you know, everyone literally sees it differently. So it's just such a again a kind of an arbitrary way to look. Like in that job, it's her paycheck probably relies on that. When someone says red, they mean something different. Well, I got 3 examples of red in my room right here. You know, what do you want? And that's where it comes in. So it does seem like it's an odd standard. But again, I'm sure it sounds like you're or maybe not. Are you the first person to challenge this?
Well, no. In terms of firearms, yes. There was a chap who's retired a few years ago, a guy called Rob Webster, who joined the police in, I want to say, the late 70s. And he was upfront about it when he joined. He says, I'm colorblind, and he went through his career all right. And then he went for an advanced driving course. And then when they did the eyesight test for the advanced driving course, they discovered again that he was colorblind. So they put him behind a desk effectively, and he went to an employment tribunal as well. And then eventually I think his employment tribunal is what ended up or resulted in the standards being changed. Because I initially tried to join the police when I was much younger, in 1999, I think it was, and I got rejected initially because I was colorblind, and then applied again in the 2000s and managed to get in because the standard had changed, and that was probably because of Rob's court appearance. Excuse me. I'm the first person to whinge about the firearms thing, but I know since me, AFOs have been caught out and they've lost their jobs or lost their tickets effectively, and then gone to ET again. But what we are finding is happening is that they're getting discovered, their employer is having a bit of a wobble, and then pulling them from the job, and then actually going, oh no, you've been all right for the last 5 years, haven't you, since you've been on post? Yeah, go back. And then so they're effectively U-boating through the organisation, but they're demonstrating that they can do the job absolutely fine. And I've spoken to loads of them who said, absolutely fine, no issues at all.
Yeah, and it sounds like you said back in 2003 or 2004, you know, with there in the UK for the regular police, they kind of said, well, this is actually, we don't need this. This is not used anymore. And then, you know, if Australia is starting to do it, it sounds like it's starting to go that way. So maybe your case can be the one to take it to that next level. Because again, this sounds like, to me, it's just like, well, it just sounds like, oh man, they just don't know what they don't know. They're going, look, this is the test. This is very serious. This is involving firearms. This is involving life or death. Like we can't, you know, so I get those arguments, but those aren't, there's no evidence to support those claims is the problem. It's anecdotal, and it's not even a good anecdote, right? It's not even, it's the train crash story. Oh, you know, after the guy dies, he was colorblind. Sounds good to you guys? All right. Sounds good. 200 years later, where this is how it is. But I appreciate that you went back and even looked into that, because this is how those things start. And the second and third order effects don't come about until decades or centuries later to where that started, and then a science forms from it, and then a business forms from it, and then we find out, oh wait, this is kind of junk, this doesn't work anymore, you know what, that doesn't apply here. So that's constantly in flux. And then, but if you only know it from your angle of, well, no, this is what the rule is, this is what we got to do. I mean, how many different type of, you know, so bureaucrats, so to speak, have we all been in front of or heard before that went like, no, but the standard is this, and we're going like, yes, I know, we're saying that's the problem, is the standard, or what this issue is. It's not this individual, it's the way we're measuring and assessing this person just doesn't really make sense.
And I would caution us too that humans are generally a smart species that learns from their mistakes. And so if this was a significant problem everywhere, you would have a scientific body of research to pull from that would show it. Good ideas stick around, and when things are dangerous, they stick around. That's why you're not reading a lot of material about goiters or hunchbacks not being allowed, as 7-Eleven clerks or whatever else, because there's no body of research and no reason that would come up. And this one, to me, when you wrote it, the reason I was so excited by writing you back, and as soon as I talked to Brian in the morning, was like, hey, you got to see this Chris thing, and I even asked Brian, you remember, Brian, I said, let me take the first crack at this one. The reason I was so excited is because there is no valuable research that we can pull from, and even the sports industry is way behind. They got so many more issues, concussions, and all the other types of stuff. But coppers, man, you got to take a look at this. If you're an agency and an institution, you're going to pass up a great guy like Chris or some other person because of an unfounded fear of a hypothetical event.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the colour vision thing that really sort of grips me is with it as well is armed cops in the UK are cops. First and foremost, they're police officers, and they're using the exact same skills that they used prior to carrying a gun. And a lot of the firearms teams, when they recruit, they make a big point of saying, you are still a police officer and you're doing a police officer's job, except you can obviously escalate slightly more than somebody else can with a taser or a baton. And they seem to have lost sight of that a little bit. And
right.
It's a shame because there's a lot of good people out there. I mean, this might be me being slightly biased, but I've spoken to a lot of cops who are in firearms with colour blindness, and they're all good people, and a lot of them are the ones that I think are the better performers, because there's something about them that they do things in a slightly different way. They couldn't tell you. It's that tacit knowledge, isn't it? They don't know how they're doing it or why they're doing it. It's like, if I say to you, how do you ride a bike? You can tell me how to do it, but you wouldn't be able to do it based on that. And they're missing out on those people, and those people will be absolutely, well, not all of them obviously, but the ones I've spoken to will be really great in that role because they've got that motivation to do the job properly and to do it well. And like I say, it goes back to that faulty machine, isn't it? We're not faulty machines. We just see things slightly differently. We get to the same end result. We just go about it a slightly different way. And the fact that it's hard to verbalize how we do it, I think that's part of the problem. And that's why people go, well, you're not past that test. And unless you can show us how you do it. And a big thing in the UK with the colour vision thing is to demonstrate coping strategies. I don't know what they are. I'm sure I've got them, but I couldn't tell you what they are.
No, that's another great point on top of it. So I don't want to take too much more of your time, but is there anything you have like next where you can go with this, or something you're planning on doing, trying to appeal again or gather more evidence? Someone out there listening can go, hey, I know a case from France where an officer did that. We get random, like you, I mean, we get those type of contacts from people and people reach out. So is there something you're looking for, or the next step that you're taking?
We're just continuously pushing it. I think there's a definite feeling amongst the chief constables in the UK. We're split into 43 different forces, and each one's got its own chief constable. And I think amongst the chief constables, there is a real appetite to look at this because they have to provide an armed function. They're not providing the armed function that they want at the minute because they can't get the people, and they're at risk of losing people, and they don't want to. And I think a lot of them, particularly my chief constable, Simon Cole, who's colourblind himself, from my conversation with him, he doesn't believe that the risk is there. So I think at that very top tier, there is, an appetite to do something about it. But again, it comes down to money, it comes down to time, and it comes down to priorities. And it's probably not a priority at the minute. So I just keep me with 2 chaps at the Police Federation, a guy called Shay Donald, who's the vice chair, and the Firearms lead, a chap called Steve Hartshaw, who've both been fantastic with this. They're constantly asking people, kicking doors in, really pretty much bullying people into listening, which is good. And there's us as a 3 and other people as well. We are constantly asking the question, and I'd like to think at some point in the near future there will be a bit of movement, because, like I say, I think we're going to get to a point where we're going to lose a lot of AFOs through retirement. A lot of AFOs who are going to get retested and then get removed from position, and they're not going to be able to fill those roles. And our terror threat at the minute is just being reduced, but it's still, an attack is likely. And if attack is likely, you need a response to it. And if that response isn't coming from the police, you're going to be waiting a hell of a long time for the SAS or the military to turn up.
Yep. That's a great point. Greg, unless you've got anything else to add on top of that before we wrap up here. I think that was a good, yeah.
It's a great place. My thing is, stop looking at the differences, start looking at the similarities. If we're talking about a performance issue, Chris, I wouldn't be there. If your performance was substandard or it was somehow inhibited, Brian and I wouldn't even have taken it on. Know that we're here for the long ball. We're here for the long fight. Please use us. We'd like to help in any way we can.
No, I appreciate it, and I more than likely will do.
Yeah, and if anyone out there listening too, please write in leftofgreg@gmail.com or get a hold of us on a bunch of different social media. You can find all that, everything in the episode details. And if you've got something that you've heard or know, oh, hey, there's this study out there, or there's this situation that came across, and I know some, it might be the one that helps, where they can look at it. And like you said, this also seems like that case where, just the research hasn't caught up to what's happening on the street, right? It's just not there where, I mean, it's like anything. We're stuck in our ways until something comes along and has to really, really change it. And then we go, oh, wow, that was kind of stupid, but that does take time. But I think because of technology, because of conversations like this and people being able to share that information easier now, it's kind of happening a little bit faster, where maybe before they would have just told you to go pound sand and that's enough. And, you're never going to get heard from again. So,
Brian, final thought from me, I just can't abide as an emoter thinking that there's some little boy or girl out there that has been tested and somebody says, well, you have a color deficiency, so therefore there's 9 jobs that you can't do. I mean, we have to turn that around and go, how can we fix this? How can we change this so that little kid can realize their dream and be a copper in the same district that you're working, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I had that conversation as a child. I remember finishing secondary school and having a careers chat, and I said, "Oh, I'm colourblind. Can I join the police?" And the careers advisor went, "No." I was like, "All right, okay."
Wow.
Yeah, and then but same thing, you persisted,
right?
and then yeah, no, that's great. It takes people to kind of push through those barriers, and once they kind of fall over, everyone goes, "Well, yeah, that was kind of dumb. I guess we won't do that again." And then we do it in a different way, but it's constantly evolving. So. I appreciate your time, Chris, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And it was a good chat. Well, hopefully we'll have you back on again as an update, and maybe something pops up, but we'd love to have you back on sometimes. And
anytime.
Awesome. We really appreciate that, man. So everyone out there listening, don't forget, kind of follow us on social media, hit the like and subscribe button, all that good stuff. If you enjoy it, share it with your friends, reach out to us if you have any questions or comments. And don't forget that training changes behavior. All right, man. That's done the live stream. That was awesome. Brilliant. I appreciate it. That was
thank you.
That was a good conversation, man. That was actually really interesting. I took a bunch of notes. So I'll what happens, I'll publish that one next Tuesday. So when that happens, I'll send you all the links and everything like that, and then you could share it with whoever over there. I'm sure most of your mates are probably like, dude, we've heard enough already, Chris, come on. Like, I'm sure a lot of them have. I know how that goes, but when it changes, they're going to go, you know what? I guess you were right. Good on you for doing, that everyone's just tired of hearing it, I'm sure, but it gets out there, and who knows? Then we do have like a international audience. So like I said, it can spread around, and then maybe it gets big in near you, and a bunch of people listen to it and go, hey, damn, they made a pretty good point there. Let's take a look at it, or someone and send it to like, some academic researcher that has to do with it, and they'll listen and go, damn, you know what? That doesn't make sense. I'm a PhD. I can write a paper about this. And, maybe something like that'll help.
Seriously.
Fingers crossed. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's getting that, awareness of it.
Yeah.
As we say in the States, touch wood.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. That's one of yours, isn't it?
So
they're all ours.
Yeah. They started there. So I appreciate it, man. We gotta hopefully we can get over there to London sometime. So we're establishing this network. My goal is to, when we hit it big, is these guests we've had on, we go to where they live and we do like a live show podcasting there. So we'd love to come to London and do one and throw back some drinks and go to Leicester and check out the area. And we want to go to Australia and down to Texas and all these North Macedonia. Greg was serious. We have this random police officers in North Macedonia follow us, listen to us, and go, hey, we're dealing with the same stuff here. It's so cool because it's like completely random, So
hey, and
no, it sounds good.
Please, Chris, send us a message if you get any feedback, that we might not be tracking. Hey, positive or negative, please send that to us. And we mean it. We want to round the bases and come back to this in a little time to see what's happened.
Yeah, I mean, I did have an update, but I didn't share it just because I'm not supposed to know about it.
Oh, okay.
But the national lead for firearms in the UK, a guy called Simon Chesterman, he is the chief constable of the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, and basically all they do is guard power stations effectively, but they're all armed. And he's looking at this, and I've been invited to go on the national working group for the colour vision and firearms thing, but I've not had the invite yet, so I didn't mention it. But I'm hoping that it's going to come. I've been told it's coming, but I've not actually seen it yet, so I won't have my notice in until I get the job offer. Fingers crossed that's going to sort of move things along. He's a good guy, but he's one of those who doesn't want to put his head above the parapet and take the risk, but I can hopefully get in there and steer him a little bit. So once I know that that's happened, I'll come back to you and let you know. You
just created a second podcast right there.
Yeah.
There's a whole perfect topic.
There we go. Come back from that, and hopefully
the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's it. That's Brian's STD. But listen, we also want to come over and have you show us the ins and outs of the red light district, because that's still not.
Oh, definitely. Google map it. Kent Street in Leicester. You can't miss it.
Kent Street. I'll have to check that out.
I'm writing that down now.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I appreciate it, Chris. Thanks so much, man. We'll be in touch. I'll like I said, I'll send you all the links once I get everything uploaded. So it'll be beginning next week, like Monday or Tuesday. I'll send everything to you, and then it'll be out, and then we can check it out and listen to it. So.
I hate the sound of my own voice.
That's the first thing when we start doing this. I had to get used to, where you're like, oh God, I hate that, and then you eventually just don't care anymore. You don't notice it. So
it's like Brian without his soul. He just doesn't care anymore.
I just don't care. It's not there once it's there.
We're here, Chris.
Man. I appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot.
No, brilliant. Thanks a lot. Right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thanks, Chris. Be safe.
Bye.